Hello, and welcome to Through the Veil, where we get together to share stories and remember the wisdom that belongs to us. I'm your host, Melissa Kemruden, and this week, Ariel from Nook Births is joining me to share her 3 birth stories. This was such a wonderful conversation, and Ariel brought up something that I just want to expound on a little bit. She was talking about how birth takes you to the bottom of yourself. And she said that when you get there, you meet your baby as the most authentic version of yourself. And I keep reflecting on that, and I just love it. You know, I've always thought of birth as the great equalizer. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how much education you have or anything, any of these things we use to divide us. Birth finds you in the same place. We come to the bottom of ourselves. It's primal. It's a place we all meet. And I've only taken it that far, and I've always thought that was really beautiful, that it's the great equalizer, where we can all meet each other and we can connect in the same place when we reflect on our stories. But to think that our baby also comes as the most primal, beautiful, authentic version of themselves. And when we're there, we meet them in the same place. Like, that's just something I want to sit with and reflect on. And birth is so beautiful. Enjoy the story. Hi, Ariel.
Hey, Melissa.
Hi. I've been looking forward to this conversation, since thinking of starting a podcast.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, so good. Your story of your 3rd baby was like one of the first Freebirth stories I had heard from someone that I had met, like someone that I knew. And when I was pregnant with Izzy, I think, it was like a big instigator. You and probably Clara's story were the big instigators to where, like, oh, this is like a possible thing for people just like me. Like, it wasn't something I was quite considering, but the other stuff wasn't feeling quite right. And so I'm really excited just to hear your stories.
Oh, so beautiful. Speaks to the power of birth stories and what you're creating here with this podcast. I've been listening to, I think I've almost listened to every episode, and I'm just soaking it in and so excited to kind of add my stories to the beautiful collection that you're forming here. Such a gift to the world.
So tell me, Ariel, about your journey into motherhood. I'm so excited to hear your story.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to share. So it all started for me with my mother, and really the way that she spoke about birth and really, yeah, her perspective on her 3 births. So I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and ever since I can remember, the way that she spoke was so positive and so powerful about her 3 experiences. She always describes them as like the 3 best days of her life, that she felt so powerful, so strong, so confident. And it, to me, just really embedded this understanding, this foundation that birth was just really normal, that like she can do it, I can do it, that it was a really positive experience. And I didn't really know very much, but I just felt like I didn't need to, because it would just like work out for me. Like that it was really normal, and I was excited. I would, at some point down the road, I was very excited to have that experience for myself. So I was really fortunate and really privileged to have had that as the foundation, because I truly believe that shaped, each of my experiences, which, the first one led to the second, which led to the third. So I will forever be grateful to her for that. And interestingly, she was a GP back in the day when GPs, family doctors, also supported birth. So she was always, flying off to a birth. Like that was sort of part of my upbringing, was just like her having to kind of duck out sometimes at tricky times in our lives. But it it was really normal for me. And she never spoke about it in this like, oh, like I'm here to save people, or, thank goodness I'm there, I have the answer. It was with a deep reverence for birth and for families. So yeah, so that's how it began. And then I do you want me to sort of lead into my first experience and first birth? Yeah, sure. So at the time I was living in Newfoundland. So I lived in Newfoundland for 7 years with my husband. And we coached competitive swimming. At least that's what I was doing previously to now being in birth work. I was a competitive swimming coach for about 20 years. And back then we had a swim team that was really like our extended family. We were super close with about 250 families. And if anyone knows Newfoundland, you know that they are the best people, and they really, really welcome you in with open arms. So I had this amazing community there. And really, when I was pregnant, it was like this baby was everyone's baby. Like everyone felt this really deep connection and excitement to me and to the baby. So it was really lovely. But I also didn't have anyone else in my circle or that I knew who had even had a baby. Like I was very much the first of my friend group so I didn't have sort of, a role model or someone who had walked the path before to learn from and help me sort of form some of the decisions. So I really just sort of went with the flow, which at the time in Newfoundland, and still mostly it is the case that back then there were no midwives. And I think now there's some, but mostly you don't really have the option unless you're really lucky to have a midwife. Mm-hmm. And certainly you're just birthing in the hospital. So I got given an OB who, she was really lovely, but, was still very much a medical model of care. And I just really felt like I was on this assembly line of care, of sort of checking the boxes. And luckily, like I was very healthy and everything was just really straightforward. But I really had that feeling of like, this is, I guess, just what happens. And I didn't really know to question anything or know that there were even other ways to go about it. But I was very busy with my work, and my life was very full. So I loved being pregnant. And I have to say that's another gift my mom gave me, is she just like loved pregnancy so much. She was very active. One funny story is, so she ran 10K every day that she was pregnant with me, which I don't recommend at all. She's like a world-class athlete, cyclist, or was. So she's not a typical person, but even the day that she gave birth to me, she ran 10K. So I always had this understanding that like I could keep living my life and keep feeling strong in my body and good in my body. And luckily I did, and I swam quite a bit. My background is in competitive swimming. So that for me was this amazing way to feel strong and really connect with my body in pregnancy. And I ended up doing that with all 3 of my pregnancies, which was hugely beneficial, I feel. So I even swam with each of them. I swam the day before I gave birth. It's sort of not on purpose, but it just the way that it worked out. I was always swimming right up until. So yeah, basically I knew that I was going to be planning to birth in the hospital and with whoever was on call, right? Because you have no control over who's there, which is so bizarre because you're meeting with this one person and there's like such a small likelihood that they'll be at your birth. But you just sort of go like, well, that's just what I get. That's you don't question it when you don't know any.
It's like, it must not matter, right? It must not matter. Yeah. They do something different.
Exactly. This must just be the way that is works, or it doesn't matter. Exactly. So basically that day, and a funny piece to the story is that my husband and I had just accepted an offer to move to the Caribbean for a job, for like his job. And I was going to be on mat leave. So he was going to be coaching in Grand Cayman. And we were that day actually meeting with these 2 moms that are on like the swim team board to let them know, look, were actually going to be leaving. And like, we're very close with them. This is like a really huge deal, making this announcement to them. Like, it felt like it was really making this real. And there had been a lot of like emotions and anxiety, and just like, I was so distracted, I think, with this huge life event that was happening. Not the pregnancy and not the imminent birth. So basically that morning I was like 40 and I don't know, 40 and 5 or so. So like, you know, I could birth any day, but I was in complete denial. I was like living my life. My mom had been visiting because she was going to be there for the birth and after. So we were just like hanging out, having a great time every day. I was taking her around the city. So that morning we had these 2 meetings back to back with these moms. They came to our home and we sat them down, and like, you know, we were crying. It was super emotional. And they were so lovely, but it was like a big deal. And on the second meeting, I started going upstairs to the bathroom just over and over. And just, you know, like, oh, I just need to sit on the toilet again. I've got a lot going on. But this is what happens with all of my births, is that I'm in complete denial. And I often seem to have a lot of loose bowels, which is great, and a really common, early labor sign. But especially for my first, I was really in denial, and I was so preoccupied as well with other things that were going on, which was actually so great, because I was having some like, you know, crampiness for the last day or so. But when I went upstairs one of the last times, the mom was like, yeah, she's not coming back down. Like, you're having a baby. Like, she knew. And I certainly did not. So I'm up there and I'm starting to really feel like super uncomfortable. Like that feeling when you're, you know, you're either constipated or you have diet, like just, everything really feels uncomfortable and not good. And I remember calling my mom, because, you know, she's the person I call when I'm not feeling well, when I need that support. She's just the best, and which is why I wanted her to be there. And I'm calling her like, can you come over? I need help with like, I've got this situation with my bowels, or like, and she's like, okay, I'm coming. And by the time she gets there, I'm like leaning over the banister, like swaying and moving. And she's like, Ariel, you're not, like, you're in labor. Like, this is labor. And I'm like, no, I just have to figure out what to do with my bowels. So I was really, really in denial, which is great, because that meant I was just giving my body what it needed moment to moment to just be present to the situation, but not add more to it, and not kind of get in my head. And it was great to have my own personal experiences of this early labor time, because it's a really big piece that I see when I'm supporting people, that people can really get in their head. And, you know, if early labor is many, many days, it can be really hard to be in that. So that's a huge, a recommendation, I guess, or a suggestion for people to, you know, not add more than they need to in this time. So it really started to pick up, and I tend to have fairly swift labors in terms of, you know, what would be the average. Again, there's like every possible way that a birth can go. So, but I would say that I tend to move along. Once I'm in it, things are picking up. So I was at home. My plan was to just stay at home as long as I felt I could. And what did I do there? I was, you know, on my bed on hands and knees and moving, and my husband and my mom were, you know, just supporting me. And eventually I got to the point where I felt like, okay, I think it's time to go. And I look back, and I think at the time I thought, okay, well, like, the next step is to go to the hospital, and that will mean like I'm closer to having my baby. Like, if I do that, it'll happen sooner. Like, I think that was sort of the rationale for why I wanted to go, was actually just to like take the next step so I could be done. So that's not how it works. We know that, but that's, you know, what was probably going on in my mind. So we drive to the hospital there. It's a short drive, and I had probably 3 sensations during that time. And the drive is never fun, no matter when you go. So just sort of having to get through that. And then when I got there, like, it's definitely a hospital that's quite, I mean, Newfoundland is just a bit behind in a lot of ways. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now experiencing what I've seen at hospitals here, there were a lot of things that, you know, wouldn't fly over here. So the triage room, to me, the way I remember it was like a little tiny space for me to be on, like a little elevated bed kind of thing, like a platform, and then barely enough room for my mom and husband to just stand beside me. So, and then curtains, like it felt really like I was an animal, and they were just basically coming in to check me and then would leave me alone. And so not a pleasant experience. But things did progress, and then I eventually was in a room. And so, yeah, I had quite a few vaginal exams. I don't remember them super well. I definitely was in a bit of a dissociated state, and things were just so strong that I was really deep in my labor. But I will say, like, I just assumed, and I assumed this beforehand, and I assumed this during the birth, that having your cervix checked, having a vaginal exam was just like part of what needed to happen for your baby to come out. Like, I didn't question it at all. I really came into this labor knowing very little, which, you know, was maybe just the path that I needed to, that led me to everything that I've done since. So I don't have any like regrets really. But it's just interesting to sort of see where I started and then where I went from. So I had quite a few checks. I don't remember like the details on that, other than I must have, you know, been progressing, because they never, you know, offered to put me on Pitocin or anything like that. But the nurses were constantly asking me if I wanted to have an epidural, if I wanted to have pain relief. Like, they were almost saying, like, you should, like, pushing it on me. And that was one thing that I was very adamant about beforehand, like through my entire pregnancy. That was the one thing that I really felt like not 100% sure, because I was still kind of in that, like, well, I don't know, I've never done it before, but like I really think that I can, and that I really want to plan for that and like be really clear in that. And again, I think that was from my mom. So, because she had 3 really unmedicated, like instinctive births, all in the hospital, but really doing it her way. So that's what I was planning to do. And that was very hard. I am actually so impressed. I feel like that was much harder than my other births, in the sense that I actually had to fight off things that were being offered to me, which is so challenging when you're in that vulnerable state and you're already doing so much work. So I'm impressed with myself for that. And my husband and my mom were amazing at supporting me. It's all a bit of a blur, and I definitely have the least recollection of this birth, which was now 11 years ago. And what I do remember, though, is this general sense of like fear and stressfulness in the space. Like, it just didn't feel, I didn't feel calm or, at peace, really. There was just this air of stress and anxiety and fear. And then I eventually, I'm sure it was very much coach pushing. I'm sure they were like, you're 10 centimeters and you can start pushing, like that sort of thing. I think I pushed, probably it was like an hour and a half or close to 2 maybe. And I remember near the very end that, and I think I was on my back, on my side, like a bit of, shifting positions, but a lot of coaching, I'm sure. And near the end, it was a resident who was like, quotation marks, catching my baby. And they said, you've got this band, this hard band that's blocking the baby. We need to do an episiotomy. And it wasn't really a question, but they did sort of like kind of get ask for my consent, which of course is not true consent at all in that situation. And one thing that my mom, I had asked of her is like, I really want you there, not as, a medical care provider or someone who is going to give me that kind of wisdom. Like, I just want you there as like my mom. And so she, kind of held back on saying anything like, well, why don't we, shift positions, or like maybe if we got on hands and knees. Like, now I know, like, we could have done so many other things to support baby and being born without an episiotomy. Another just detail of my mother is there were times when she would speak just in the labor and her voice would just really bother me. And so I couldn't say like, Mom, stop, don't talk. I couldn't get the words out. And so I just would shove my hand over her face, cover her mouth. And which was, I knew I felt so safe doing that. I knew that she wouldn't be hurt. Like, I always tell people when they're like, I don't know if, if I want my mom there, I kind of do, but I'm not sure. And I would tell people like, if you feel comfortable doing that, like something like that, where you don't have any concern that you're going to want to appease her over what you need, because there may be times when you really need to do that. So I remember doing that thinking, this is wild, but I actually can't talk. I have to just use my hand. So back to baby being born, they did give me an episiotomy, which, I definitely suffered for years from that. And I very much that is definitely a piece that I regret, but again, it has offered me so much learning. So baby was born right away after that. And I remember they like held her up because we don't know the sex of any of our babies. And so the plan was that I was going to see the baby and sort of speak the sex into the room. And so they held the baby up, which is like so awkward. They're just like holding her like genitalia in my face. And I'm so stunned. I'm just like, I'm not able to process and even really see what's going on. And so eventually my husband was like, it's a girl. And then I got to have her on my chest. And I remember saying, it's Arkaisa. She's here. It's Arkaisa. Because we had known her name, like really since we were just starting to begin seeing each other. We had kind of like jokingly been like, so we had our Kaisa. I'll briefly just share also I hemorrhaged, not a huge amount, I don't think, but this is only something that I learned when looking at my birth records when I was preparing for my second birth, was that I had like a decent amount of blood loss. I would say not extreme, but certainly, something that they were taking note of. And this impacted my second birth, this piece of information. So I'll kind of come back to that. But the other piece to this first birth was the early postpartum time was in that hospital. The postpartum unit is a shared room. So I was in a room with, it was either 4 or 6 of us in a room. And many of the other people, they didn't have babies. Like they were still pregnant. They were maybe there for monitoring. And basically what happened was there would be groups of people coming in to visit them, bringing them like fast food. Their TVs were always on. It was like, I definitely have some PTSD from that. That piece of the birth was so traumatic and so horrendous. There are some moments that I could describe of me just like unable to walk. Like I couldn't even get to the bathroom because of the episiotomy and the blood loss. Like I think I was really like unable to fully stand and not feel like I'm going to pass out. But the second night I was in such a bad place from not able to sleep, the environment that was around me, that I actually like hobbled my way into the hallway to try to get a nurse's attention. I'm like holding onto the railings, like, please, can someone like get me a different space? Or like, I felt like I was spiraling and unable to like look after my baby safely, or like I was really in a bad place. And I just, that I don't wish that on anyone. I feel like it's so important that you're able to rest and have privacy and have that space protected in that early time. So if anything, that was one of the like sort of the most traumatic pieces of that birth was the postpartum. And luckily that was something that I really felt strongly about, having a different experience with my other births. So that was the first birth. And when I left that birth and I sort of re-entered like my life, I definitely, like I was always really active, and yoga was another piece that was like I probably went almost every day. Like I was definitely in a state of like over exercising and like type A kind of go mode before pregnancy and birth. And so I really slipped back into that and didn't take the time to rest and heal. And I think it was because of the way I experienced birth, I really wasn't stepping into what I've now learned, like leaving my maiden and stepping into mother. Like I was holding on to my maiden self. I hadn't had that like real transformative experience that I think deep down my subconscious knew like there was something more that I should have experienced. There was something like I didn't feel the way that I thought I would feel. I remember that it was like a hard thing to pinpoint, but there was something about the early months with my daughter and probably until I really experienced a different way that there was something missing there. And I still really had a lot of growth and expansion to do. So yeah, so I had some pain and discomfort that lasted a long time from that episiotomy and from the lack of healing, like taking time to really rest and heal with that first birth. But luckily, like my breastfeeding journey with her, besides the early, like probably most people, the early days and week or so there was some challenges, but I luckily had a really beautiful experience with breastfeeding, which is just one of my favorite things I'm really passionate about. So I was really grateful for that. Yeah, that's my first experience. Yeah. Should I walk right into the second? They're all so connected, of course.
Of course, right? It's like all one story in a way.
It
right?
really is. It is. Yeah. So we ended up going to the Caribbean, living there for a year, which was really challenging with a new baby and not knowing anyone and being a new mother. And then we moved back to Vancouver, where I'm from, with all of my family here, which was always the plan. And I was so ready for that by the time we came back here. She was about just over a year old. And I don't know when I really started to shift into like some deeper unlearning and learning around birth again. Like I think I started to there were some different things that were sort of offered to me. Like my sister actually sent me The Business of Being Born to watch that, which of course was like for so many people such a huge catalyst for then further learning and unlearning. So highly recommend that for everyone if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
And then, yeah, totally. And then I think I just continue to sort of dive deeper into home birth, the idea of home birth, and then reflecting back on my own birth experience. And I think by the time I was pregnant with my second, which she was like two and a bit, I was pretty clear that I wanted a home birth. And so that whole pregnancy was really about taking steps to really create the home birth experience that I wanted. And I wasn't a birth worker yet, so when I look back, like I still knew so little, but it was, again, just the evolution of the journey and where I was at, right? So I found midwives, and generally I would say like I really enjoyed the connection with them and felt really good about their care. And when I look back, of course now I know so many more things and have experienced so many more things. And but at the time I was really excited. Like I was really excited to have this different experience, and almost all of me was really sure, but there was definitely a part of me that was like, okay, what if I can't, or what if I'm not able to do it? And at the time I was living in a small kind of dark apartment that I actually just didn't like being. So I actually like really think that a small space, a dark space, is like a perfect place to birth, but it didn't feel like home to me. And it was not too far away from my mom's house, which was my childhood home, which that really did feel like home. And so I decided I was going to give birth in the basement, or we were going to set up the pool in the basement of her home, my childhood home. So the plan was that we would shift there once things were going, and then I'd have my mom to sort of be an additional support for my daughter. And I wanted my whole family there. So I had this vision of basically my siblings, my brother's partner, who was basically like a sister to me, her there, my dad and his partner, my mother, my doula, and my midwife. So I had this whole team that I was envisioning I thought more so that they would be in the home and that like it would be like this, like a bit of like a party, like a celebration. Not necessarily like all around me, but
Yeah.
things ended up going a little bit differently. Um, and then I also, during my pregnancy, I had discovered the idea of a doula, and I don't think I knew very much, but I was instantly drawn to the concept of like having this person that you're choosing who knows birth and who's really there to support you in this deep way. And I, at the time, was doing a lot of yoga and found out that this yoga teacher who I just loved was a doula. And so I basically just asked her, and she was totally on board. And so that was really fun to have this person to just get to connect with and chat about like my dreams and my vision. And so the time came. This baby was also similar time of gestation, so like just over 40 weeks. And again, I felt so powerful and strong in my body all through pregnancy. I swam a lot and did a lot of yoga with like this ginormous belly, probably like more than I should have been. When I look back, like I was still a little bit in that mode of, I don't know. It's, we all have our different sort of like phases of our lives where, we're doing some deconditioning. So I was still there. But I felt great. And how did it begin? I think, it was in the nighttime. I had, again, like many people with other children, you often tip into your labor when you put your child to sleep and you're able to actually just really relax and shift out of that thinking brain. So I think I woke up with some sensations, but they were very manageable. And at the time, I felt like I couldn't sleep. I'm not a great sleeper, so I thought, I'll just go lie on the couch. And I was I was watching this show at the time that I was on like the final episodes of this like mini series, and I was really into it. And it's very like action packed, intense, like not really the sort of thing that probably a person going into labor should watch, but it was kind of great because I had this like night to myself. I watched many episodes through the night, and whenever there was a sensation, I would just press pause and just breathe through it, because I definitely couldn't watch. I couldn't do both. Like that was sort of where I was at, was that I really needed to focus. But once it passed, I was totally back on. So I just kept watching. And I think in my own way, that was my way of distracting myself. Like I think if I was just lying in bed, trying to sleep, like if I could sleep, that is what I would say anyone should do. Yes. Don't maybe take this advice, but I think knowing how I am with sleep, I was probably going to be kind of cycling in a state in my brain. So this was a way for me to just sort of like shift and check out a little bit, and it was fun. Like I was enjoying it. I was feeling good energy wise, really good. So eventually it got to a point around 7 a.m. where I had finished my show and I also was starting to notice that things were really picking up. So I had a shower and I called my doula, and then we woke up my daughter and we headed to my mom's. And even that sort of like leaving my apartment building, getting into the car, getting up to my mom's house, like there were some real like stop in my tracks, like hold on to something and really work through a sensation. So by the time I got to her house, it was around just after 8 in the morning. And I'd say in my mind, that's when I think of like active labor starting. So that was when things really kind of shifted. I arrived to the place that I was going to birth. Like I felt like, okay, I'm here and I can really kind of just let myself go. There's like nowhere I need to be, right? And that's the biggest thing when someone is planning a hospital birth, is it's often really hard to really let yourself fully lean into your birth when you know you have to at some point move and shift to a new location. It's really hard to do that. So this was really great to arrive in this space that I felt so safe, and my daughter felt so comfortable. And I had envisioned like dancing with my daughter and like kind of having a lot of fun in this time. And I did, like, I think I tried to read her a book, or I tried to kind of dance with her, but it quickly got to the point where I was like, no, these are really, really getting strong. And my doula arrived, and I remember she was timing them. And she quickly just had to stop timing them because there was really no break. And she was kind of just physically supporting me full on, which I don't time sensations ever as a doula now. So it's, it's one of those things that I've learned means nothing. And for me, is not a useful tool. It's so much more useful to be watching and attuning to the person you're supporting. So yeah, we had some really beautiful moments where we were kind of entangled with each other. And I really found that there were a few things we did together that made such a huge difference in me really like surrendering to the intensity and just kind of like letting it just wash over me and diving in deep. So that felt super intense, but really great. And then I got to a point where I was like, I want to go downstairs. Like I just felt this need to go like low, like go down in sort of physical sense. And also it's darker down there. So at this point, it's probably like 9 a.m. Things are getting bright. So going down to the basement felt really good. It's also colder down there. And there's this room down there that's very dark with a bed. So I went in there and I'm just standing, swaying. And I remember at one point, my doula had been doing this thing where we were embracing each other and we're rocking and swaying. And then she subbed my husband in, who had been setting up the pool and was now, I think, finished with that and was coming in to be with me. And so she subbed him in, which is so lovely. And you're always wanting to engage, bring the partner in to be with the birther in these intimate moments. And so he came and he was doing it with me. And I just said, I remember it was so hard to speak, but I pushed these words through my teeth. I was like, you have to sway your hips because he wasn't moving in the way that I needed. And it really speaks to, I think, maybe it's, the feminine kind of just like wisdom that she had in her body or how attuned she was to me. But that knowing of like, there's just something about often a birth attendant that knows that way to really be with. And so he got it a bit, but it's funny, the little things that can really set you off. Like the fact that he wasn't moving his hips made it almost impossible to manage that wave.
Yeah. Because you know exactly what you need, right? Like when you're in labor, like there's no, like time to even say it sweetly. Like it's just like there's only like one need and I know exactly what it is and we're going to need to do that exactly this way.
For sure. And if it veers off even a little bit, it's like no, that's not okay. Yeah. So that and reflecting back, it's like, yeah, that was so amazing that's how connected I was to that instinctive, intuitive knowing. And so I'm really deep in it at this point. And then I think shortly after that, I started to feel some pressure and that urge, that beginning of that pushy feeling. And I could even hear it. And at the time, so my doula, I think we were like, oh, let's, call the midwives. So she calls the midwives and they're en route. And I'm sure had let them know, like, I think she's, starting to be pushing. And they told her to get me to resist the urge to push, which I will never do to anyone ever because I experienced it in my body probably for only like 5 minutes. And it was the most it's I can't even describe it. It was the worst feeling I've ever experienced. It's like trying to stop like a train that is just full speed ahead. It was really, really like going against this intuitive knowing that I had built up and trusted in, to then have to stop that. It was not right. So again, she was just doing what she was told and at the time with what she knew. But it was a really good experience for me to have that knowing in my body of, okay, I will never do that for someone. So it didn't last long. And then the midwives, I think were close or were coming, and I got back up and got in the pool, and the pool felt so incredible. It was just like I thought it would, and I heard it would. It was such a gift to get in there. And then I was pushing. So I often have my eyes closed. So I had kind of had something over my eyes. So I didn't really see what was going around me, but there were a lot of people around me. There was all of those people I described. I think in total, 11 people ended up being around me for the emergence of my baby. And I think some of them, like my dad and my brother and yeah, a few people, you know, they came down to sort of like check in, like kind of like, oh, things are sounding really, really strong, and like, let's just check in. And then they just stayed because it was just happening, and it felt right. Like there, I certainly wasn't like, no, I don't want you to be here. It really felt right, and everyone really attuned to the energy in the room. So everybody was quiet. There was, you know, music playing, which I didn't hear at all. I was in such a different place, but I feel really grateful that they all got to be there and witness that. I think, and you'll hear in my third story that I decided I don't want to do that again, but it was really beautiful to experience it as like a real family event, and to give them the gift of seeing a normal birth like that. Yeah. So the midwives were there. One thing I really wanted was to not be touched. I didn't want, like, I knew I didn't want a vaginal exam. I didn't want, you know, anyone checking to see if I was like fully, or like, how am I pushing? Like, just, I don't want to be touched at all. And one interesting thing that happened was I was pushing, and my mom was there, and she asked, like, I think it was clear the baby was right there, and maybe the midwives had even looked with a mirror so like they could see. And my mom said, oh, like, can I touch? And I shifted into that, and I have no fault. Like I hope if my mom's listening to this, that she doesn't feel bad at all, because it was, again, a really good learning experience for me. But I shifted into that people pleasing mode outside of myself, and I said yes, I wanted to give her that. And she touched, and this is my mom, who I feel like so close with, so comfortable with, but her hand just like barely grazed part of my inner thigh, probably, as she touched the baby's head. And even that tiniest touch was like almost all I could do to not just like close in and shut everything down. And so to think like what I've seen and what I know happens to people with perfect strangers touching. Yeah. So that was a really, an interesting piece, but so that things moved along. Pushing was challenging, and we ended up, after my baby was born, seeing that she had, you know, a cone sort of going off to the side of her head. But also like super normal. Like it was not a super long time pushing. It was probably 45 minutes, but it did feel like I remember really working hard. I think still there was a bit of that external kind of like, am I pushing the right way? Or like even just in my head, like, is this how I do it? And kind of adding to the instinctive pushing. So I wasn't fully, I was definitely getting very strong urges to push, but I was also adding a lot to it. So it's just interesting for me, because the third experience is like sort of the next level of that. So they're each a little bit different. And then, my baby was born in the water, and they basically just, all they did was sort of tuck her through my legs, because she was being born kind of out behind me. I was on my knees leaning forward. And then I got to, you know, scoop her up, which was something I really wanted to do, and put her on my chest. And we have a video of everyone, you know, around, and it was really peaceful and beautiful and quiet, and also like lots of sounds of like just joy and celebration. And my daughter, who was just over 3 at the time, she had been upstairs with my mom probably, or another people, but had come down right before the baby was born, like probably 5 or 10 minutes. It's like she knew that baby was coming. And I think she said, like, when someone asked her after, like, I just knew. So she came down, and she was there at my side. And then one of the things we wanted to do was have her announce the sex as well. And so we have this video of this, and it seems like it took me many, many minutes before I knew, which didn't matter at all. I was completely in an altered state, and so overjoyed and just basking in it. So whether it was 2 minutes or an hour, it wouldn't have mattered when I found that out. But she looked and she said, it's a boy. And my mom was with her and was like, are you sure? And it took her quite a while before she finally realized, like, she was looking at the umbilical cord and thought it was a penis, just so cute. So I eventually, found out she was a girl, and I would have been so overjoyed either way, but sisters. So yeah. So then the the third stage of that birth, and this is a piece that I really wanted to rewrite with my third, was this was quite managed. And so I'd had this like very quite undisturbed, really physiological, intuitive birth of her. But then I was quite quickly removed from the pool. One of the things that we had talked about in pregnancy was they were concerned about hemorrhaging because of the first birth. And at the time I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I didn't know, and I didn't understand why I'd hemorrhaged the first time, which I now know was really to do with all of the fear and all of the intervention that was, of course, limiting my oxytocin at that time. And so my body wasn't able to do what it knew it needed to do. So I had consented to having active management. So having Pitocin and having cord traction and having that placenta be born quite quickly and not in my own terms. And I see photos of this time, and it's very like, there's all these bright lights and everything's just quite rushed. And there's a lot of, hands and touching, and it just, I look back and I feel like there was a lot of interruption that occurred, that like a missed opportunity. That golden hour was really taken from me. And that even went on to then, okay, well, you've had this tear, so why don't we just suture you now? And so my baby ended up, and I find that to be like the suturing, I personally have such a hard time. It's so intense. It's really tough after you've just given birth. And so I couldn't even hold my baby. I passed her on to my husband, and I think he went and he like brought her upstairs, and my daughter got to hold her, and like I kind of missed this whole time of like other people getting to soak her in and have this moment, like, because I'm downstairs being sutured, like it's silly. So I got through that, and then I finally got to have that, like, just her on my chest. We started nursing. Everyone left the room, but it took like several hours. So that was really a piece that I when I reflected back, really wanted to have a different experience, or I would have changed things. And then another piece of just the postpartum time with my second is that, again, I still just really like tried to do things too quickly. I was still in that mode of like, oh, I feel great, I'm strong, like I can do this. And so I remember this one day, I was about day 5 postpartum, and we walked to this park that was not that far, but probably a 5 to 10 minute walk to take my daughter to the park. And it was a beautiful day out. Like, my second child was born late August, so it was beautiful. And I'm walking along holding her, and she's just crying and crying and crying. And I am like gushing blood as I walk, like just like bleeding away. And I remember just being like, so then I put her on my breast, because, I'm a second time mom. So like, I can do this stuff, right? But like, should I be?
Yes.
Is that really what I should be doing? Even though I can. So, and I just have this real memory of just walking, bleeding, feeding my baby who's crying, who's like clearly communicating to me, like, this is too much. Like, what are you doing? Like, let's go back to our dark bedroom and like lie in bed. So it really took me a while. It took me a while to figure this stuff out. I also had, I had a 2nd degree tear with the second. So I had my episiotomy with my first, and I think I even tore a bit more with that. Then I had a 2nd degree tear, I think around the same spot as the episiotomy.
Like on the scar?
Probably. I think so. Yeah. And then I, didn't take the time to heal and recover properly with my second. And then I ended up having, like, for about a year and a half, was having painful sex that just it just was going on for so long, like a good year and a half before I finally sought pelvic floor physio care. And it was only like a couple sessions with her of doing some like release work, internal work, that was intense but so powerful. And then that really made a huge difference, and basically it healed that. But I really feel like it was my third birth and healing on such a deep level that made kind of healed all of my experiences, to be honest. But yeah, so I wish it hadn't taken me 3 times to figure out how to do postpartum properly, but it has been something that I feel so strongly about now, and try my very best to educate my birthing families and just like anyone that I can share with in the community, as to really taking that time seriously. So yeah, so that's my second. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking so much.
I love it. Keep going.
Awesome. Okay, great. So my third birth. So after my second, I really did feel like, as much as I say, some of the things around the third stage, the placenta, that piece wasn't really clear to me until much later. So when I left that birth experience, I felt so overjoyed and powerful and just like such a badass, in just that I had experienced this real sense of power in my body. And yeah, just like this, the transformation that I had been looking for, I had felt like I was really feeling. And I couldn't shake this obsession now with birth. Like it was about a year or so, maybe a year and a half after my second birth, that I was just like, okay, I can't stop thinking about birth. I'm now, soaking it up everywhere I look. And I could even notice that like my love for my coaching job was really diminishing. Like I was shifting my attention, my focus, my thoughts were all towards birth. And so I was like, okay, I'll just look into this like doula thing, because the other thing was that my doula, there were a few specific instances, and also just like an overall feeling of having her at my birth. Like one of the things I felt that I reflected back on after was when I was in the pool, I was holding her hand, and that's kind of the one consistent thing I was doing. I was on my knees and I had her hand, and that was everything. And I remember feeling like her presence and holding her hand and being able to look at her if I needed was like, she was anchoring me. She was tethering me to the physical space and the present space that we were in, so that I could feel safe to really go off and really unravel and like drift away into wherever I needed to go, and really be like uninhibited in that feeling, because it can be really scary to go there, but having her presence really felt like safe to do that. So that was like this really unshakable feeling for a long time. And eventually I thought, okay, I'm just going to look into this, because I can't just sit with this feeling for forever. And I actually just lucked out. I can't believe how lucky I got in that I looked up a doula training. I found this one that happened to be a weekend that I could get away, because with my husband's work, like he's away a lot of weekends, and it's very rare for me to have like a 3 or 4 day span where I can have childcare and do that. So I found this one and I booked it, and it happened to be Wise Woman Way of Birth with Jessica Austin. And I just like, I look back and I'm like, if I had gone a different way, like I probably would have eventually done her training. Yeah. But I'm so grateful that she laid the foundation, and that her being in that course, it truly changed my life, probably almost as much as my birth did. I remember going to her course, and like I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about her or about the course or really about like options for doula trainings. This was the one that worked out, and it was in person, which I really liked as well. And I sat down and the class started. This was in 2018. So it was mostly just Jessica, and then Gloria helped with one of the sessions, but it was a lot of it was Jessica. And I sat down and things started. And I remember holding onto the seat with my hands, like gripping the chair, and just like my whole body just being like, I never want this to end ever. Like I want to be in this class for the rest of my life and sit here and listen to her. It just like, I was already fearing the day that it was going to be over, because I just knew that I was starting this path that was going to be my calling for the rest of my life. Like I feel emotional talking about it because it was so impactful, and it just like struck something in me that I'm sure was always there. And yeah, so that was incredible. And especially having had the experience that I had, and then learning about birth in the way that I did with Jessica, it just like validated everything and also took it to a whole new level. So I was like now just like way more obsessed and was so excited to get into birth work and support birth. And so I started supporting births, and gradually that built. Like I had a couple years there where I was supporting births, but also coaching, and also had 2 young kids. And then I got pregnant with my third. And so I had sort of a slow start to birth work just because of the way that my life was, and, you know, then having another baby and postpartum. But yeah, so that's how I got into the work. And I feel so fortunate that Jessica was like the foundation, and that I had that connection with her. Should I speak to my third birth? I want to make sure I give it ample time.
Totally.
I'm looking at the time now.
No, don't
Great.
worry. I love it.
Okay,
yeah.
Beautiful. So how did I get onto Freebirth? So with my third, again, I was on this path now of forever learning about birth. I still know to this day, it will never be complete. I'm always going to be learning. And I think somehow I stumbled onto this idea of free birth and birthing outside of the system, birthing without a medical care provider. And for a while, I was just listening to the stories. Birth stories, ever since I've discovered birth stories, have been my obsession. Like they're probably the thing that I do the most and listen to the most, and on podcasts, and especially if I can ever hear in person, but positive birth stories. And so I started listening to Freebirth birth stories, and I really became obsessed, but it was kind of like this private, like secret obsession that I was having. Like I didn't really tell people. I wasn't really telling my husband. I guess at this point I was probably pregnant. I think I was pregnant with my third while this was sort of brewing and happening. But in my conscious mind, I was like, well, this is amazing. This is so wild. Like they're really wild, but like I could never do that. Like I love hearing about it and it sounds incredible, but like that's not for me, or I can't do that, or it would take too many, like there'd be too many obstacles or pieces to figure out for that to even happen. So it was never, it wasn't clear to me for quite a while that was actually what I wanted, and that was actually possible. But that is like the journey of pregnancy and preconception, is that like you just are where you are, and you just follow the thread, you follow what speaks to you and resonates with you, and you're never behind, you know, you're just right where you need to be. So I just kept on kind of leaning into what felt exciting or curious or like lit a fire under me. And I'm trying to think I think what happened was, I think I started talking with Jessica. Actually, there were a few times where we met up in person, which those meetings were so impactful for me. Because I was finding that I had of course hired my same midwives, like the same team, which you do, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'll just have them again. And at this point I had been attending births, and I wouldn't say that I knew the birth world very well. Like I didn't, have a good sense of the different midwife teams and different, just the differences as human beings, but I knew them already and I had that connection. So it just, to me, made sense. So, but I was really feeling that same sort of like, but even more so now as I was more aware of being just going along like I was just like everybody else, and these are the things you do at this time. And I was starting to notice like that there's something lacking for me, or that I'm not getting the care I'm wanting. And I had lots of questions or lots of thoughts, and they're not being heard. I was feeling like I wasn't being heard. And so Jessica offered me that real sense of hearing me, and then reflecting back what I was saying, and kind of encouraging me to like go deeper and be more curious around what it was that I truly wanted. And so that was really like the work that I did in my third birth, was like really going deep into what it is that I want, not just like surface level, like, well, this sounds nice, and, you know, this is probably what people think I'm going to do or what I should do. It was like, no, what do I really deeply desire if I could just have exactly what I want? And so we had a lot of great conversations, and she helped me figure out how to speak to my care provider about these things. So like what questions to ask them, or what are the ways I can speak to them to have them feel comfortable with the things that I was wanting. She also did, you know, I don't know that she was very amazing at like not being like, oh, well, you sound like you just want to have a free birth. Like the beautiful thing she offered me was that I came to all of my choices fully on my own. And I really like admire her for that. And I've been really working on that skill for myself, because sometimes you can hear people speak and you're like, oh, well, you sound like you just want this.
I know where it's going.
Yeah. You're like, I know, but also they need to figure that out for themselves. So it was such a gift for me. And that was where the magic happened, was, so a couple things is I got to a point with my care providers where I was trying to ask for things, but like not feeling like I could use my voice, not feeling like I could really speak up and fully stand in what I wanted. And so around, I don't know if it was maybe 2 months out or 3 months out. Yeah. I decided I was going to switch care providers. So I actually was like, okay, I'm going to go to this other team that I think is going to be more supportive of these things I want. And I had like a call, like I didn't even really meet with them yet. And then my original midwife team found out, like, I guess they, you know, they're told that that I'm going to switch. And so they actually, one of them called me, and I was at work, and I remember she called me, and I just like started crying, and I basically just shared everything. Like I finally spoke out my truth, and it was so freeing and powerful to do that. And she really like listened, and it felt like we were so much more connected after that. So then I was like, oh, I don't need to switch. It was just that I felt like I wasn't able to speak up, and I wasn't being heard. And now I feel like I'll just stay with this team. So I ended up doing that. But I was still just trying to, like, the things that I was trying to create were things that ultimately they weren't really able to support, or like I was trying to make something fit that wasn't able to fit, if that makes sense. Like I wanted them to like not, like I didn't want any fetal monitoring with the Doppler. I even maybe wanted them to just be outside and like not even be in the space. So I was kind of like trying to create this unassisted birth, but still trying to appease, you know, other people, like not myself. And so they were kind of like, they were kind of saying yes, but kind of not. Like it was this, like, there was a lot of vagueness to it.
Yeah.
Then I ended up having, so it was around 36, it was my exact 36-week date. And I was 36 years old. It was my birthday. And Jessica was having this workshop. It was like a half-day workshop. And I don't even really remember what the topic was exactly. It might've been like informed choice, and, you know, but basically there was something about it that really struck the clarity for me. And I stepped out of the class, and I can remember, I have poor memory in life generally, but I can remember stepping out, and like the sun hit my face, and I felt so light, like I was floating, because I had just finally 110% realized with clarity that I knew what I was going to do. Like I realized that I was in my own way. Like nothing else was actually stopping me from having this birth that I wanted. Like I was just getting in my own way of just taking the reins, like taking full responsibility and power and control of my experience. And so it was such a huge, like, kind of light bulb moment to kind of to land in that clarity for myself. So I remember kind of onwards, I felt so light. Like, I just felt, I had been feeling this kind of buildup of heaviness that wasn't physical. It was like just emotional struggle for many months. And then this was like, it just let it all go when I realized, like, I just want to birth with just my family, and I'm not going to have the midwives there, and I'm going to just birth the way that I want to birth and not have to fight for things or convince people of anything. Like, I can just do that. So it felt amazing. And I knew that I was going to need to but I wanted to have conversation with my husband and let him know. And then a conversation with my two sisters and my mom, and let them all know what the plan was. Cause I wanted them there. And anyways, those all went really beautifully. My husband, that was the biggest one, and the one that I felt was like the most, if that goes well, like, I'm so set. And had been prepared to, like, I have all these things to sort of like convince him, or, like evidence almost of like proof. And he just stopped me, and he's like, what did he say? He was like, clearly you really want this, and I trust you. And he said something like, you're really amazing at giving birth. Like, he just had full confidence in me, and he could see how much I wanted it. And it was just totally game. This was at 36 weeks. So from then on, and I had beautiful conversations with my mom and sisters, and they were so excited. Like, they could just see it in me that I was so lit up and so, in my power and excited. So the rest of my pregnancy was so beautiful because I felt so clear, and I was able to really take care of myself. And I noticed I really was craving like alone time. So childcare for my two kids, so that I could go and just like be with myself and be internal, or like go for a swim and get in my body. So that was like the best. Those are the things that I found to be like the best care for myself, not necessarily, going to prenatal visits, but like really giving myself care that really I know the best way to do that. Right. So, yeah. And I'd also decided to have Jessica come to my birth as my doula, which in the end, she wasn't able to come, but she had her close colleague friend come instead. So I knew that I was going to be really well supported. I also knew that I had what I needed. And so fast forward to the actual birth, so many details, but the pregnancy felt so monumental in my journey. So I wanted to share that, because pregnancy is like such a huge portal for so much of the work that feeds the birth. And my birth was very fast. And all of my births have been getting faster. Like, my second birth was like 2.5 hours of active labor, I would say. So it was quick. And so this one could have been really quick. It also could have not been, but I think there was something about how much inner work and how much really confronting a lot of things and letting them come to the surface that I had done in pregnancy, that by the time I was in my birthing time, I was like very open. Like, I could feel every part of me was just open and clear, and I was like taking such good care of myself. I went to a reflexology appointment that weekend. And I was very clear, like, I'm not here to induce, like, avoid that, like, avoid the spots. I just want to feel good and like have, someone touch my feet. And I was doing all the things not to induce. I was doing the things that felt good to take care of myself and like have fun and have pleasure in this time. That was a theme that I really wanted to bring into the birth, was pleasure for the birth. And so I ended up having my last swim at Kids Pool, which is my like favorite place in the world to swim, the day that I went into labor. So like earlier that day. And then things sort of started. I was having cramps, but I was still like busy that whole day. We had friends over for dinner and, you know, my other two kids keeping me busy. So I was keeping it really quiet just to myself, but kind of going like, like definitely there's some things shifting. But we got the kids to bed and I knew, you know, I should go to bed as soon as I can because things may start in the night and I just want to make sure I have some rest because I'd had a really busy day. Like I was not super rested. So I went to bed and then I woke. Oh, I missed one little piece. So when I came home from that swim and I had the house to myself for a brief time, which is rare, and I knew things were kind of beginning and brewing. And like I said, one of the pieces that I wanted to weave in was pleasure, and so I took that opportunity to give myself some self pleasure and just like be connected to that sensual side. Which, I mean, if like what a way to be in your body, right? To touch your own tissues, to feel pleasure through your body. I think that's such a beautiful thing anytime, especially in pregnancy, especially in birth. So that felt really like a beautiful piece to have as part of the beginning of my birth. So then I went to bed later that night and I woke up maybe around midnight or 1 a.m. and was having sensations and going to the bathroom. So again, it was that like clearing the bowels,
making
back
space.
and forth, making space. Yeah. Walking back and forth to the toilet and back, getting back in bed, being like, okay, try to sleep again. And I couldn't sleep. So I just lay there and rested and was breathing through the sensations. And it kind of got to a point where I realized, yeah, I think I should wake my husband up because one thing he had asked me for this time was the only thing I ask is that you give me enough time to set up the pool. Like wake me up or make sure that I have time to set up the pool. So it's like, okay, I think this is probably a good time. So he goes out and he's like sweeping the floor and like getting the tarp out, like he's setting things up. And I remember now I'm like on my knees. I can't lie down anymore. Like things are picking up. And I remember looking over at him being like, why are you just sweep? Like, why is the pool ready? Like, and of course he was doing perfect, but it just, in my mind, I could tell that things are really picking up really fast and nothing felt, you know, ready, which totally fine. It didn't need to be, but, yeah, I think at that point I said, I think you should call my doula and my sisters and my mom. So he reached out. That was probably around 2:15. I only know this because I've asked him kind of time frames down afterwards, but I certainly wasn't aware of the time at the time. But I could feel like, whoa, I think things are really picking up. I was on my knees. I wasn't vocalizing yet, but I was really having to focus through the sensations and they were quite close. And then I started getting shaky. And I remember my like doula brain popped in and was like, oh, like, that's weird. You're shaky. Like, are you like that adrenaline flowing and are you in transition? Like you can't be in transition. So that can't be right. So maybe you're just cold. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll go. The pool's nowhere near ready. It's not even being like, there's no air in the pool even. So I'll go to the shower. I'll go to the bathroom and go in the shower. And the house we were living in at the time has the most incredible shower. It's like a spa. It's like, anyways, it makes perfect sense that I was going to end up there. It's such a perfect little space. So I went into the bathroom and I immediately had this instinctive need to pull out the night light and make the room just like absolutely pitch black. Like I couldn't deal with like a speck of light, basically. It was 3 a.m. So it was very dark, but I got into the bathroom and I shut the door. And I think there was something about being in that small space. And, you know, a bathroom is where people really feel like they can be uninhibited and feel that sense of privacy. And I'm even someone who, and I'm sure many people are, where like if you're in a public bathroom stall and then like someone comes and sits beside you, you feel like a little bit like, oh, clenched, or you just don't feel as free, right? And so that's such a huge part of birth, is that real sense of privacy and feeling fully uninhibited. So when I got into the bathroom, even though it's just me and my husband and the kids are sleeping upstairs, like there was something about going into that room that felt like, okay, now I can really let go. And things just took off. So I suddenly was super vocal. I got in the shower and I was just like roaring. Like it just went kind of from that like breathing to just full on roaring. And I remember I had a sensation, like my first one really, in the shower. And then we had this little wooden bench that sits in the shower stall. And so I thought, okay, this could be like another 8 hours or 24, whatever. It could be a really long time. So I'm going to sit and take a rest and rest my legs, like rest my body in between the waves. Like I was sort of in that like practical, like doula head space. So I sit down. I maybe got like 20 seconds, and then I got back up and did another wave. And that was the only time I sat down. Every other, like the waves just were one after the other. There was no rest. And it was unreal how powerful it was, how intense it was. I mean, I was doing like all the work in this incredibly short amount of time. But when I think back, like I never would frame it as painful. It was just pure power and intensity and like this energy soaring through my body. I have this vision, this memory of noticing or kind of being aware, almost like from above, like looking at myself from above and seeing this flow of energy kind of coming from the top of the shower head down through my body and then like down into the drain. It was this real like downward flow that felt so like cosmic and just like out of this world. So I was having these sensations. I was very loud, and it's pitch black in the bathroom. And my husband comes in because he was hearing me set my vocalizations over the sound of the birth pool being blown up, which like the birth pool is loud when you're right there, and it's not that close to the shower. So it was loud. So he came in, he kind of popped his head in, and then I think I just said, like, baby's coming. Like, because at that point I could feel that we were really, really close. Baby was coming. I was probably in the shower in total for like 15, maybe 20 minutes. So it was all really quick. So he came in right near the end. And I remember, again, like I couldn't speak, but I remember he sort of stood there on the other side of the glass. And I think he said, like, should I come in? And I just held my hand out, kind of like told him, like, stay right there. Like, I can't move or shift what I'm doing to create space for you. Like, I just need you to be right there. And that's perfect. Don't you dare open the door or like, move me in any way. And what I had been doing in there was I had been doing this flow of my legs were kind of alternating forward, back, forward, back. So it was sort of like one leg forward, then shift, and then the other leg forward. And again, it was completely instinctive, this like real primal sense of knowing what to do, more than I've ever experienced with any of the other births. So it was really, really cool. And I was standing. And so he's right there on the other side of the glass. I start to feel, maybe this had happened already before he came, but I started to feel a pushy sensation. So it started to build as pushiness. And usually that, for most people, there's quite a bit of time where you're kind of leaning into this like pushiness, but you're not really pushing yet. And so I was like, whoa, like I'm already starting to feel some pressure. Like I'm already getting into that. That's wild. And then within that same sensation, my body like full on pushed, like was just a complete instinctive, reflexive bearing down, pushing. And my hand flew down to feel my baby's head and feel my tissues. Like I could feel, like, I don't know how to describe how much, a large amount of baby's head just suddenly be brought into my hand. And one thing about with my second birth is that I remember that same instinctive feeling of putting my hand down, but I quickly pulled my hand away. Like I was still at that place in my journey in my life where that felt like not okay. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, that my hand doesn't need to be there. It shouldn't be there. Or that's too much. Like that's, like even in that state of being quite deep in my labor. So with my third, I was like fully uninhibited. I had unraveled so deep. Like one of the image that I see of myself in my third birth is that I was unraveling completely to the like sort of the truest, most deepest, like real me, like just like me at my core, my sovereign self, no masks. So I had let go, like the journey of the birth was really like shedding all of the layers, all of the masks that I carry, so that when I'm at that moment of meeting my baby, like I'm me, I'm the real me. I am like the pure self, which your baby is too. Like your baby doesn't have any masks. And it makes so much sense that that's the way birth is designed, for you to meet your baby at your most authentic, just truest self, because that's how your baby is. And then you can really connect in that way. So I really felt the like it was almost like they were whipping off of me. Like I was like, now that mask is gone. Now that layer is gone. And it was so incredible. And so I felt my baby's head come into my hands. And I remember, and my husband's witnessing me. He's standing there witnessing me in the dark. I don't know that he can see me that well, but I'm sure he could a little. And I remember I had this feeling come over my face where I realized that I was smiling. Like I had my conscious brain lit up and went, Ariel, you're smiling. Like what? That's crazy. And then my other hand went to my face and felt it, because it was almost like so surreal. And I remember feeling my smile and going like, whoa. And when I look back, I think I was smiling, not just because I was, really high on oxytocin, which of course I definitely was, but it was this sense of like, Ariel, you're doing it. Like you actually are doing it. It's happening, and it's better than you ever could have imagined, like it was coming through me through the smile, this joy and like triumphantness of everything that I had been working so hard for was actually happening. So, and then the other piece is I felt like I needed to kind of just reassure my husband. Like I felt this, like he was standing there watching, and I knew everything was going so well that I just gave him a thumbs up. So I used one hand and I just like went like that, gave him a thumbs up, so that he could see that I was rocking it, even though like I knew I was. And so, yeah. And then I had probably a little pause between that sensation pushing. And then I had one more push, and the baby's head was born, and then the whole body came. So sort of like half the sensation brought their head, and then the other half just like shot him out. And I have the water going in the shower, so like everything's wet. And he flies out. And often people, when I've shared this story, because of course I've like, especially early on, wanted to tell to every single person who would listen, I was like grabbing people in the street, like, do you want to hear this story? Because that's what happens when you have a really positive story. You're like, you just want to shout from the rooftops. So people always would say like, oh, weren't you worried that you were, gonna drop your baby, or like that you weren't able to catch your baby? Because I was standing, and there's a decent amount of distance down to the hard floor. And truly there wasn't a single ounce of doubt that I was going to just completely instinctively know like how to move my body to catch my baby, even slippery or not. It was that real primal animalistic sense, because I was so tapped in. Like I wonder if someone else had been there who was, encroaching a little bit on my space, who was even just like watching and potentially directing me at all, that instinctive knowing would have not been there, because it has to be so protected. And so, yeah, I just quickly scooped them up into my lower belly, like kind of held them against my chest, and turned around and sat down on that little stool, because I just wanted to sit. My legs were probably tired. And my husband came in and turned off the shower, and then we just got to look at each other and look at our baby and just bask in the like this moment, which is everything that I had wanted, like to have that moment with him. And not have, a lot of other things going on. I had envisioned my daughters being there. That was something I really had wanted, was to be in the pool and have them like, pouring water on me and like being around me and loving on me. That was something I had really, and having them witness. But I also feel like, it could have changed things. It would have been different. And it was just perfect, exactly how it was meant to be. So we saw, oh, his cord was wrapped around his neck, and that was really cool to be able to manage myself. Like, it was just such a, again, a very instinctive, straightforward thing that I just unlooped over his head, without a thought, right? It just, you just do it. And it wasn't because I was a doula. It was because I was this baby's mom and I knew exactly what to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So we saw that he was a boy, and we have a little video that my sister took from just the outside of the bathroom, like hearing us go like, it's a boy. Because again, we had kept it a surprise. My two sisters had arrived probably right in that like final minute or so, right before that he was born. So they kind of heard the sounds from the outside of the bathroom. And I then walked out and went into bed. So I'm sure it was a scene for them to see me just like naked and wet and bloody and carrying a baby walking across the house. But it was also just so normal. Yeah. And so we got into bed. That time, this was the time that I'd really, really had been so clear on from the get-go that I wanted to have a super undisturbed, third stage golden hour, but really like hours, like a long time, where people were just letting me and my husband, and if my daughters were there, like just us being together as a family and having no rush or time frame for anything. So my doula had arrived about 15 minutes after the baby was born, and she took such beautiful care of me, gave me some special tea, which I make for my clients. And so it was so nice to get to be on the receiving end, and took some beautiful photos and just cared for me. But other than that, everyone knew to just leave us, and we were in the room on our own. And the placenta birth was a really important piece that I wanted to really reclaim from the second experience and first. And so at a certain point, probably like maybe an hour, 45 minutes to an hour after he was born, I started to really feel this, like, kind of just like I did when I was feeling like I wanted to push, like this really clear sense of I have to shift all of my focus onto this feeling I'm having, like these cramps. Like, it was really kind of taking over my focus. And so I just instinctively knew, okay, I'm going to birth this placenta now. And I got up on my knees and I lay baby down just kind of in front of me, close, because we're still connected. And I had talked to my husband about, what this might look like and that we were going to do this. So he knew, like, okay, grab a pad and put it under me. And he just kind of like talked to baby and had his hand on baby's belly while I did my thing. And so I wrapped my hand on the cord. I think I had seen a video of someone doing this, which really helped me actually sort of practically, see what it would look like. And so I was kneeling, so I'm upright. So gravity is assisting me here. And then I just used my hand to kind of guide the cord down, and I could feel the placenta was right there, and the placenta came out into my hands. And I remember my hand is all bloody, and I remember putting my hand in the air and going, ah, just like kind of this wild, triumphant, like animal moment where it's like, this is the craziest thing I ever did. And like, look at me, Yeah. It was, I do wish there was a photo of that, but again, then it would have maybe been different. Yeah. So I have it in my mind, I have it in my body, and in my own mind what that was like. And then I felt so great. It's like birthing the placenta is so, there's such relief on the other side. And then I just had a beautiful time. We ended up, so my daughters woke up around 7. So we had them come into the room. When they woke up, my whole family was there at that point. So my dad and my siblings, and, again, it was that party, but I was separate for the most part. They were around, but there wasn't that disruption, and there was no time frame. So it was really, really felt like what we always did. Your family came and tended to you, but you were running the show, and you were getting to be in this private, cozy space. So my daughters came in, and they were a bit shy, but they were really sweet, getting to connect with their new baby brother, who just was here now in the night. And we decided to call the midwives that morning. So it would have been like 6 hours after he was born. We felt like, yeah, this feels like the right time. We've had lots of time to breastfeed and cuddle, and we've had kind of our like family moments, and now I feel ready to share with them. And also, I didn't mention, I had told them, so I actually had decided to be totally upfront with my plan. Partly it just felt right for me. Like it felt, because of what we had gone through, I knew that they knew me and that they were going to, they might have, okay, well, we have to say this, but like, I knew they were going to support me. And I also knew that I'm a birth worker and I'm going to be working with them in the future. And it just felt like kind of the right thing for me. So I did tell them, and I did continue to see them, which I don't know, maybe that was a little bit of me still trying to like make them happy. I didn't have any Dopplering, and I like declined everything, but I don't know why I was going to the visits. There wasn't anything really in it for me. But so they knew. So when they came, they were really excited. They were so excited to hear my story. They were so happy for me. So that felt really good to be able to share with them when I was ready and in my power, and not sort of them. Like, I always felt like I was on the top of the sort of power scheme at that point, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was, and it happened to be the two midwives who were on call for my second birth. They were the same two that came. So It was a bit of like a full circle completion moment there. And then the final piece with this birth was that I really took my postpartum super seriously. I had done a lot of things prenatally to set it up. I had set up a meal train that was hands down one of the best things that I've ever done. Like, I had food for our entire family for a whole month, dropped off, and even from people who don't know me, like other doulas who've never met me, dropped food off, and people were really generous, and also they seemed really like happy to, like they were so happy to be a part of supporting a family. So that I recommend.
Yes.
I also did yoni steaming, pelvic steaming, for about a month. And that was so healing, I believe, so healing for my 3 postpartums. I think it really helped me like fully heal from my first and second as well. I'd had a very small tear with my first, so I knew I wasn't going to suture it. And it healed beautifully. So I did that. And then above all, I knew I was going to rest very deeply in bed for a good like 3 to 4 weeks. I was planning to really be in bed with my baby. And because I had 2 other kids, that meant really, really piecing together support, because my husband was still working quite a bit, and he actually was away for a big swim meet at like day 8 for 5 days. And so I'm like alone with 3 children. And I knew, okay, I got postpartum doula support. I raised money for it. I really made sure that those things were there. And of course I have a ton of privilege with having so much family around, and family who like knows how to support, partly because I've educated them, but also because like I really like being around them. I found the biggest piece was like, I can look after my baby. Like now that feels easy. That's like a dream, just to be around my baby 24/7. But my 2 older kids, those were the challenging pieces. And so having people come and take care of them and really have fun with them and make their life feel special was such a gift. So I
feed you, I imagine.
Yeah. Yes. Feed me and like do things around the house. Like they would, tidy up, and so that was my journey. And since then, that birth has really impacted the way that I do birth work and the way that I support families. And I've been so fortunate to then, draw in people, because of sharing my story, people who align with that and who are seeking that type of birth, and being able to support people in that way. Yeah, it's been such a gift. So.
Oh, and then to everyone, right? When you birth like that and you share those stories, it ripples out.
It really does.
Yeah.
It does. And that's how I've connected with I mean, with you, I know you've mentioned that, and Clara, you know, our dear friend went on to, you know, free birth her baby, and many people have told me that. And then I know that their births have then gone on, like it just keeps going.
Yeah.
So like, that's what these stories that you're putting out into the world, like, I'm so excited for this because they're really, it's so nice to have a place to send people, like, here, go and listen to this podcast, listen to these stories. And even if there's just one little thing that resonates with that person, it could be the thing that, you know, is a catalyst for then changing so much in their
just
lives.
Knowing what's possible. Because these kind of birth stories, like, I did not know these birth stories were possible. Like, it was not in my realm of consciousness with my first baby at all. Like, and we need to, we need to see what's possible.
Totally. Yeah, that expansion needs to be there because we're so limited still with the way that, like, mainstream birth culture is and the way that it's talked about. Yeah.
It's true.
And it ripple effects into your whole life. Like, one of the things I've been reflecting on is, like, the way that I gave birth. For a lot of people, like, they live that way and then they birth that way. And I think for me, it kind of was the reverse. Like, I was leaning into that already, but the birth really changed me. And then I couldn't not see the world in a whole new way and basically change the way I lived. It like, that infused every part of my life and part of my being.
Yes.
And, like, how incredible is that birth can offer us that, and how much that impacts our children too, because then we're mothering and parenting from this this really powerful place where we're trusting ourselves, we're trusting our voice. Like, I think that's the gift that the birth gave me, was my voice. I mean, I'm still working on it. I'm still working on leaning into trusting and projecting my voice and speaking my truth, and really standing strong in it. But it really was such a massive shift in gaining that confidence in myself. And, like, we all should be able to step into whatever it is, that powerful place for ourselves as mothers, for not only to be great mothers to our kids, but, like, for ourselves, because we deserve that. And it affects every aspect of our lives. So yes.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Tell me, how can people contact you if they want doula support, or what are your offerings right now? Actually, how about that?
Totally. So besides, doula support, that's my main focus, where a lot of my energy goes. And so you can find me, I'm Nook Births, on Instagram, and also my website is nookbirths.ca. So I share a lot on Instagram, and a lot of people find me there, which is really, really fun. And then I also, myself and another very dear friend and birth worker, Carissa, who is also on the podcast, I think maybe the first episode.
I think so,
her and I offer birth circles, community birth circles, locally in Vancouver. And those are in person. We are gathering, we are connecting with each other and sharing a positive birth story. So we do it once a month, and there's a positive birth story being shared, just like everything we've just said, to really offer that expansion and deepen the possibilities of what birth can be. And also for community, because a lot of people are journeying through preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, really isolated, especially if they're maybe feeling not as aligned with mainstream birth culture. It can be so nice to find people that you can connect with in that deep way. So feel free. We often share about that on our Instagram. So feel free to, if you're listening and you want to join, find us there.
Yeah, I'll put those details in the show notes so people can just click really easy.
Great.
Because those circles are so beautiful. I try to go all the time. I love it.
Yeah, we love having you there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I love your stories. I'm so excited it's out there for more people to hear.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. You can find ways to connect with Ariel in the show notes, as well as links to some of the things that we talked about in the episode. New episodes come out every Tuesday. You can subscribe, share, rate, and review this podcast to support us and submit your story. Be part of the movement toward more powerful and peaceful births. Until next time.